Dr. Jamie Morris is new with us this year, although the agency she represents, Reproductive Medicine Associates in New Jersey, is not. Dr. Morris is going to talk about what I'm sure to most of us is a really intimidating and bewildering aspect of this process, which is the medical one. So thank you very much for being here today.
Let me just tell you a little bit about our program. We're actually a group of physicians or infertility specialists. I'm actually one of the 10 doctors that's in our office. We have 4 offices in New Jersey, and one of them is right over the bridge in Englewood. So we do see a lot of patients from New York City, specifically in that office, but also in our main office in Morris County. We have a full gestational carrier and egg donor program, and in fact, the reason I'm here today is because I was put in charge of that about 1.5 years ago. And just to give you a little personal background, my child is from technology also, so believe me, I understand this process better than you think. And sometimes wish I didn't have to think about it. But just to go through the medical aspects of it, lots of people do come in and have a consultation with a physician first, just to get a basic idea of what am I facing, what am I looking at, how much technology do I really want to get into, and how can I go about that path? Because the truth is, all of this is foreign to everybody. But when I sit down with a couple, I say, this is where we're going to go from. We need you to figure out a gestational carrier and an egg donor, and how are we going to help you do that? Obviously, gestational carrier, you're going to wind up going through either a lawyer's office or an agency, and we can certainly steer you in that right direction. Egg donors are a little bit different. We actually have our own egg donor program, but our program is purely anonymous. Otherwise, if you're interested in a known donor and you want to bring in a family member or a friend, or if you want to use an agency where you can possibly get more information or get to know that person, we can steer you in that process too. But essentially, once all of the players and all of the people are involved, that's when we really take over. The gestational carriers, I actually have a half-an-hour phone consult with them on the phone before they ever step in the office. We get all of their medical records, we get all of their information, we get all of their paperwork from either the agency or from the lawyer's office, and we review every last detail. Half of our gestational carriers, their records are actually reviewed by a high-risk pregnancy physician as well to see if there's anything that we need to pick up before we start spending money bringing this person in, doing extra screening. So we do that first as just a medical background check. Then they actually speak to our psychologist on the phone for an hour just to see if there's any red flags or anything that would be of concern before we bring that person in. Once that part is completed, then they actually come for what we call an all-day appointment, and it is all day. I apologize. Right now, when you come in, you're going to be there early in the morning and you're going to be with us till late in the afternoon. But as a group, you're going to meet with a psychologist. And the gestational carrier will come in from wherever she lives with her partner or without, or if she has no partner alone. She'll meet individually face-to-face with the psychologist and as a group with you, and you will individually meet with the psychologist as well. There'll be physical exams that day. The gestational carrier actually gets screened at that time physically for all sorts of infectious diseases. All the screening is mostly done by blood work, but there are different, she gets pap smears, she gets ultrasound scans. That's when we're really trying to make sure that we believe that she's going to be a good gestational carrier. Truthfully, there's no way to know that someone's going to be able to carry a baby and have a perfect pregnancy, and nobody can guarantee that. One of our requirements, and there's about 3 pages of lists of requirements for gestational carriers, is that they've had a successful pregnancy before, and not too many pregnancies before. So they should have at least 1, but not any more than 6. And I've called up intended parents, and I've called up couples, and I've said, listen, I just got off the phone with your gestational carrier, and I don't think she's going to be good. Fortunately, that doesn't happen that often because the lawyers and the agencies are doing a fantastic job, and hardly ever do we get a gestational carrier to my level without, who's not really going to be a decent candidate. As far as the egg donation process is concerned, the agencies, oftentimes you can either meet the donor, you can see a picture of the donor, you can speak to the donor. There are different agencies with different ways of doing it. Our program is purely anonymous. We actually do not show pictures of our donors, but the difference is in our program, we will actually screen the donor ahead of time. All of her blood tests will be done, all of her screening tests are done. We actually will not offer her as an egg donor, and you will get a full 25-page profile on her, but we won't offer her unless we think that she's going to be an adequate or at least a really good egg donor. And we start setting up the in vitro fertilization cycle. For people doing a fresh cycle, which means we're going to use the fresh egg donor's eggs and mix it with you or your partner's sperm, or both, and I'll talk about that in a second. What we will actually do with a gestational carrier is something called a prep cycle, where we will actually put her through a fake cycle for 3 weeks to make sure that we can get her body and her uterus ready to accept a fresh embryo. Because you don't want to ever do a cycle where you've got nice embryos around and not a good place to put them. Now, you can then freeze those embryos and use them at a later time, but it's not ideal. So once we know her uterus responds properly to those kinds of medicines, we'll then put her back into the regular cycle when we've got the egg donor going as well. So the egg donor takes medications to stimulate her eggs, follows with ultrasounds and blood work, and then we take the eggs that have grown that month, we take them out, and we mix them with your sperm or your partner's sperm or both. And when I said both, sometimes people will literally take a cycle and say, if there's 15 eggs, take 7 of them and inseminate them with partner's sperm and 7 of them inseminate with my sperm. We'll let them grow and we'll decide which embryos look best, or are we going to do a single transfer, just embryos from partner A, or are we going to do a mixed transfer, embryos from partner A and partner B? Pregnancy rates, the biggest determinant of pregnancy rates is the egg donor, primarily. It's the age of the egg donor is one of the biggest determinants. And most egg donors are under the age of 32. So truthfully, they're in that ideal category. But not every egg donor pregnancy is going to cause a baby. Egg donor pregnancy rates are somewhere between 80 and 90%, and those variations are going to come from the sperm, and they're going to come from the uterus and other aspects that may be involved. But those pregnancy rates were usually in that kind of range because you're using what we call the ideal egg. This is someone who's not had infertility issues. This is someone who's young, and they don't have to be proven. Unlike the gestational carrier, they don't have to have had a child or have caused a pregnancy by being an egg donor before, although it's always kind of nice if you have a repeat donor who's done well before. We then bring ourselves up to the embryo transfer. Those are all things that you will have discussed ahead of time with your gestational carrier. And based on the egg donor's age and all of these discussions, we will help you kind of give you a guideline. You know what? You probably should put 2 embryos in because you're using an egg donor, and that's usually the standard guidelines for our American Society of Reproductive Medicine because pregnancy rates are so good. We don't want you having triplets if we can avoid it. There's nothing terribly wrong with triplets, but most of us don't want to have 3 babies at one shot, and they do pose more risks. So most of the time with an egg donor cycle, we usually try to limit it to 2 embryo transfer. But we also will tell it to our patients to say, make sure in your contract that you say you can have up to a 3, up to a 4 embryo transfer. And you will talk that out ahead of time, and that will be part of your contract. Because there will be times where the egg donor only gives us 3 or 4. And we're concerned the quality might be poor, and we want to go ahead and give our best chances. So sometimes we will transfer 3 or 4 eggs, embryos, if that's what we need to do. And you want to make sure you discuss that with your gestational carrier ahead of time. Other possible setbacks that can occur is that truthfully, your egg donor may or may not do as well as we think she's going to do. There have been times where we have canceled egg donors. They start cycling and they're not making enough good eggs, or they're not responding properly, and we'd be better off stopping their cycle and restarting. Sometimes gestational carriers, fortunately this is about less than 2% of the time, but the endometrial lining or the uterine lining doesn't develop properly, so we have to cancel the cycle. We take those eggs and embryos and we freeze them. They tend to do extremely well, have gone through the freezer for short and long periods of time, but in an ideal situation we would be doing a fresh transfer. But those are possible issues and setbacks. And then there's not getting pregnant. I mean, here you've gone through this entire year's worth of work to get all of these different people involved and all these different people working for you at the same time and all working together, and then you might not get pregnant. Obviously, we would hope that you'd have extra embryos that might be available from that cycle that we've frozen. That would be a lot less expensive to come back and use an embryo that's in the freezer back into your gestational carrier. But, pregnancy rates still with in vitro fertilization at best get about 80, probably up to 85-90% take-home baby rates at best with an egg donor. So we're still not at the 100% rate yet. But those are all the medical aspects to think about. And I'm going to be here for a little bit to answer any questions. Like I said, we've got some information at our table that's some pamphlets. We also have a website that's an easier way to get some more information. So please let me know if there's anything else we can do.